we're just gonna ask you questions about like, what do you remember about growing up in Princeton, or, you know, your business, or any of the exciting things that happened, you know, when you were in school and different things like that. So I see you brought some notes. You can freestyle it and go anywhere you want. We probably do want to get out of here before 10 o'clock.
Just don't have to worry about that.
Okay. So first of all, Cliff, how long have you lived in Princeton?
I was born in 1952, actually in Minnesota, but essentially
Your whole.
this was home. Well, yeah, other than
So what brought your family to Princeton?
I was born and raised here. My grandpa, my great grandfather is buried in the Catholic cemetery there. If you walk down that main entrance, you'll see they redid the stone. It says Adelbert Mashuzinski. Well, that was Mashuda before they changed the name. So, and at least the family lore has it, is that they came to Princeton and he was working on the railroad. And he got his legs cut off in a rail accident building the railroad. And the railroad gave them the farm where Eugene Mashuda lives now as a settlement for the accident. And that's where my grandfather and his 109 brothers and sisters were born and raised.
Wow. So what year would that have been that he came? The railroad came here in 1872, so it would have been in that time frame?
You know what? I can't remember. I was really busy back then. I don't remember. Hey, I want to interrupt a minute. You know,
Yeah.
First of all, look, I do know a lot of these people here. Hi, Rich. I just saw him the other day. But I'm not the best public speaker in the world. It makes me a little nervous. So I had to bring my guardian of 45 years with me. That's Liz. So for those of you who
nice
don't
to
know,
meet you, Liz.
yeah,
Thank you for coming.
she leads me wherever I go.
Okay.
Okay, so continue.
So you moved here and eventually got here.
Was basically born, I mean,
Yeah.
more or less born
Yeah.
and raised. I
Okay.
mean, I was born in Minnesota, as I said, but
Yeah.
we lived here all through grade school. And full disclosure, I did not go to high school here. And after that, after high school, I was gone for a long, long time, but back now. So my childhood memories are the Catholic school, grade school, and
Did you go to school with any people that are in this room right here?
well, let's see, some of their kids. No, actually not, surprisingly.
Okay.
But some of Marge's kids, and
Okay.
still good friends today with a whole bunch of them.
Yep.
And we're the same age, not the same school, but as Mary Swed's kids.
Okay.
Yeah, I had one in 51 and one in 53, so you're right between the kids.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's Connie and Steve.
Connie and Steve, yeah.
Yep. Mhm. So,
Well, good. So what do you remember about the Catholic school? Was it taught by nuns?
oh yeah. Yeah, and to be honest about it, they weren't as nasty as you think they were. You know, a little discipline, as little brats probably needed.
You can't get now.
You know, yeah, right. Back in those days, and John, you went to that Catholic school too, I presume, didn't you?
I did for 4 years,
Then what?
then to the high school,
Okay,
in the triangle.
okay, well, again, the triangle was before my time at any rate, but my first year in grade school was in the basement of the church. So that would have been, what, 1957? I think the school opened in 59, so it was 57, 58. And then the school got built, and either I was in first or second grade probably when the Catholic school
was
opened.
built.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So what do I remember about that? Well, here's one thing I remember. After recess, they would line you up for that new school by class, right? By age. And the older kids got to go first, and then all the way down to the lower grades by grade by grade. I wish I could name the guy, but I can't because he's still alive and he's a lot bigger than me. And the one thing I remember about him is that guy had the biggest feet of any guy I've ever known in my life, and he does, he's got about size 16
Oh my
shoes.
God.
But I remember him walking into that new school every day at noon hour with those big old feet. But yeah, the nuns taught there, and of course they had the nuns' house was on the west side of the church. It was, I believe, identical to the priest house. They had a little chapel in there, so they had mass in there. We had 2 priests in the church. We had Father Joe when I was that age, and Tom Sosinski, who was from Berlin. So they had 2 priests, and of course a lot of us kids were altar boys and whatnot, and so we served mass not only in the church but in the nuns' chapel as well, because they'd have, I don't remember if it was every day, but it was pretty often. And you know, that was one of the things in the summertime is you serve mass through the whole summer. I remember we lived out on D there, and riding my bike to serve mass, I mean practically 6 out of the 10 weeks in the summertime. So we had mass in, you know, so we did, you know, the mass in the big church, the mass in the chapel, the nuns all lived there, and then of course we served for the funerals and stuff too, which was kind of a scary occasion for a kid at the time. But church, you know, church and school, you know, when Sue called, she says, well, you know, what your life was like in Princeton or growing up, and I thought about it for the last 2 weeks, and I thought, well, what's the big difference, you know, and everybody says, oh, that was such a simple life back then. Well, it was, and I decided why. We had no social media, we had no 24-hour news, and we had no Walmarts. So if you think about it, huh?
We had sweats.
They're on my list. Absolutely.
That was at Walmart.
It was a mini Walmart for its day, really.
Yeah.
But you think about that, so no social media. So as kids, you had to think of what you were going to do to entertain yourself, right? You didn't sit there and scroll all day. If you didn't, you know, go riding your bike or go fishing or do this or do that, you had nothing to do. So that lack of social media, I mean, it was all a good thing, I think, because you figured out what to do with yourself, right? There was no 24-hour news. And that's all I'm going to say about that, except it was a good thing, I think. And no Walmart. So no Walmart, spawned all these businesses in town, and every town was self-sufficient, really, because of that. So I think like those 3 things really frame the difference between being a kid today and being a community today, and what we did back then.
What do you remember about, like, what stories do you remember downtown when you were a kid growing up, or shops and different things that were down here?
Well, I just happened to do a mental drive down Main Street.
He is prepared.
He is.
What?
You're prepared, Cliff.
Yeah.
Well, you
3
told me
butcher
to
shops.
be ready. Ask her, I do what I'm told all the time, you know that. I mentally went from one end of the Main Street to the other, and I apologize if I forgot something, because I'm sure I probably did. But I'm gonna not start on that end, but first, you always gotta remember the Wilsey and Wackel's funeral homes, right?
Right downtown.
Right, and they had the furniture stores, and the reality is Joe Wilsey buried all the Catholic people, and Wackel's buried all the Lutherans. You know, yeah, and you know, we laugh about that today, but it was just, and it was okay. I mean, there was nothing wrong with it. That's just
Oh,
the,
even.
it's just the way it was, right?
Business.
Yeah.
Yep. The 3 cemeteries and Wackel's and Wilsey. That's just the way it was. So we had the funeral homes. I remember when they had the blacksmith shop across from the mobile station up there where that chimney guy is now.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Mike Marshall. And again, some of you folks probably got me by a year or two, so you really remember it, but I remember going in there with my grandfather, because he farmed out there when he was on the farm, and had the old sickle, hay sickle, and, you know, they were all teeth,
Yep.
and if you knock a tooth off, pull it out, throw it in the pickup, and down to Mike Marshall's you go, and you know, and again, maybe you just remember the highlights of it, but I just remember walking in there and that fire he had was burning. The old guys were sitting around that fire playing cards, and I think they were drinking Kingsbury beer.
Yeah, I think
It wasn't Miller Lite, that I know, but maybe it was Schlitz or Pabst or whatever, but he, you know, pound the rivets in and he'd go back to work. So remember Marshall's, of course, across the street was Christie's, Standard Station, and he lived across the street, and right around the corner, which is still the corner of the new Mobile there. What was the name of that store?
Pie Alley.
Pie Alley there, yeah. What did it have? 4 bar stools, and honestly, it was a quick trip before its time, because you could buy soup in there, you could buy gum, you could buy this, you could buy that. I mean, it was with 4 or 5 little bar stools in the back.
You remember it as Chalupas too, or what?
Right, correct. That was Kalupa's, right?
It started it, in my memory, it started.
Yep. Yeah, which wasn't Kalupa, they were the people, they had the produce store up here, and I think, weren't they related to Christophic somehow, if I
Well,
recall?
Alice was a Kalupa.
Pardon me? Alice was?
Yeah.
Okay, okay. Of course, the Dizzy Bar, everybody knows that, where that was, right by the bridge. Full disclosure, I never went there. And then going down the main street, there was Henry Graham's, and that's where we would go every Sunday after church to buy the newspaper, buy the Milwaukee Journal. We'd go in there, we had that screen door that, you know, was on a spring and flap, it would slap every time somebody went in, and all the papers were piled up on the floor there, the Milwaukee Journals, whatnot. That was a ritual after Sunday morning church, was to stop and get the newspaper. And then, of course, Sweats. I remember being in there certainly many times, and everything they had there. And I think, Mary, you're right. That was the original Walmart. Really. Of course, Hotmar Hardware with Lillian Hotmar, and I don't remember her husband, but I do remember her. And of course, remember going downstairs where Alex Bagutsky
right.
sold all the appliances,
Right.
right? Walked down that stairs, and that was the appliance. Lipke's Meat Market. I'd go there with my grandfather all the time. He'd always go get fresh meat, you know, and pork chops for dinner, or bologna, or whatever you may be. And here's one that I don't know how many of you remember. Holly's Restaurant, Hollenbach's. Remember that? Yeah. Yeah, Roger Hollenbach.
Right.
And funny thing, and I never knew this, that he was somehow related to Dorothy Bernard, who just passed away last week.
That was her mother.
Hollenbach was Dorothy's mom?
Could be.
Okay, so,
Her last name was Kylie.
Yeah, but she was remarried.
so we went to the visitation there, you know, and I got to thinking, that one guy looked awful familiar, older, but you know, it just something was catching in my mind. I should know that guy. I got home, reread the obituary, and I said, I'll bet you that was Roger Hollenbach, because it looked like him. You know, it's just something 50 years later looked familiar. But they were there, and then of course, Bill Szynski had the little market on the end of town, which was a pretty famous place
Slugs.
to go and eat, and kind of a convenience store there too. And the one thing I remember about that is Jim England, who lived kitty corner where that bed and breakfast is now, he worked there. and he was about the coolest older kid in town, you know. He was the first one that had Beetle boots. And real tight jeans, you know, and I wanted Beetle boots and I wanted to grow my hair out, and my mother wouldn't let me. But he worked there, and of course, Bill, you wanted a good hamburger, that's where he went. And
The
then,
little market was the social area, social meeting. That's where the men had coffee in the morning and that's all it got, everything that was happening in town, you found out from the little market, right?
Yeah.
You did.
and you, yeah, and you think about the fact that all them kids that the Szynskis, what did they have, 4, 5, 6 kids that all around my age, Tom, Joanne, blah, 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 they raised their kids in that little store.
Yeah, it was a small, but big.
And it was small, but that's the way, again, there were no Walmarts.
Yeah.
So that was our,
And there was no evening news, that's where you got the news.
Yeah.
there you go.
In its heyday, the
24 hours.
semi-drivers knew about the place too.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Yep, that was the place to go, and which was kind of a treat to stop there and go get a hamburger and fries and,
That was really just truck drivers, not semis so much.
and of course, who could forget, I remember going to Doc Miller's office many times when I was a kid. I remember him coming to our house, because he did those house calls then. And you'd go up in his office, and of course, he was always smoking those Camel cigarettes. So his mustache was just as yellow in life as it is on that picture.
And his fingers.
And his fingers, yeah, he brings it, you know, what's the matter, he'd be smoking away. So I was like 17 or 18, and maybe I was 18, 19, whatever it was, and I was away to school. So my driver's license renewal came due, so my mother called me and she said, your license renewal is here. I went, well, I'm not gonna be home for a long time. Well, she took the renewal down to Doc Miller, and he asked her, can he see? And she said, yup, and he signed it. That was it.
If you diagnose it, it's pretty at that.
Where your place is now, the Shell Station, that was kind of a meeting place for kids too, I think. I think maybe Dick Crackle might have worked there.
Charlie worked there.
Charlie did
I
too.
know Dick, he told me.
You know, again, I was around like my 16, 17-year-old summers, and that was, they had candy bars there too, but that was where you kind of hung out, you know, a little bit at Johnny Shell. Buchan Motors, which was Gagney, is Gagney now, and remember very well Luke Buchan. God, he must be 50, 60 years now, but remember when he ran the place, and he must really walk to work every day, because you'd see him walking and he'd always have a suit and tie on, you know, because that's what people did back then. Even my ancestors that worked on the road, there's many pictures of they're out there in the dirt and the mud and this and that, they all got a tie on. But remember Buchan, Luke Buchan, and when the bank was downtown, I remember when they built the new bank here, that was a big deal. Hartman's Jewelry, what was it, Ralph and, I can't remember her name. Ann Hartman, right?
And Ralph.
And I can't forget Grubbles Drive-In, because that's where the daycare is now, right across Kitty Corner, right by this, where the subway was. That was Dreblo's, and Art Dreblo ran the place, and then he had a son, Danny, who we were all good friends with, but we don't want to talk about everybody I hung out with. Most of them are gone now, but we'll skip that chapter. So those are the businesses I can remember, and again, I'm sure I missed some, and if anybody knows what I missed, I apologize. You know, I thought too, and they talk about, you know, she said, what do you remember? So you think about all these people back then who ran their businesses, whatnot, raised their families. They were the people who made the community run, right? And I thought, not just now thought about it, but have for many years, that as they retired, they'd be walking down the street. You'd see them, they were retired, so they'd go for a walk. You know, and I distinctly remember driving through town, there was Scotty McCormick, Bill Sosinski, Luke Buchan, Art Lickey DeWitt England, he was the basketball coach, which, back to the schools, we gotta talk about them in a minute. Harold Bardall, remember Bill Hatcher? He was in a wheelchair, he was paralyzed in a swimming accident, and he was around for, first on crutches, he'd walk sometimes on crutches, you'd see him, and sometimes in that wheelchair, but always around town.
That was Donnie.
Was that Donnie?
That was Donnie.
I thought that was Bill.
Bill
Well,
had,
Bill had the swimming accident.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
Right.
but Don had polio. and-
Oh, okay.
They were both crippled.
Yes, okay, all right, thanks. Good thing you're here.
That's all right.
Irv Zedrow, he was the insurance guy in town. Muddy Rule, he was our mayor. And insurance guy, of course, there was Pulvermachers. Reverend Stroshine, he was the minister at the Lutheran Church for probably forever, I suspect. And then, of course, we had, at that time, Father Joe and Tom Sosinski, both at the Catholic Church. And then I also remember Mark Milejic being the biggest man I've ever seen in church on Sunday. He was a big, big guy. I thought. Maybe it was because I was so small. But he always looked big and strong to me. And would have to be remiss if I didn't mention those who kept everybody in line. In my day, it was Vic Lichtenberg and Ray Winetsky. I think he was our police officer in town, then he became Green Lake County Sheriff, if I recall, right?
yeah,
Was he a police officer here too?
Yeah.
Tried to stay away from those guys. You know, you talk about, okay, the school. If some of you will remember they used to have huge basketball tournament at that Catholic school every year. In the winter, there'd be, I'm gonna guess, a dozen teams. It would start out on Saturday, and there'd be games all day Saturday, there'd be games all day Sunday, with the championship on Sunday evening, Sunday afternoon, and trophies, and I mean, there was a ton of people would go to those. So relating back to activities, what did kids do when they were young? A lot of kids in Princeton, I mean, were big basketball players, to be honest about it, and I think maybe because of that tournament and this and that, and I mean, I remember playing basketball all the time, just pickup stuff with Gary Wick, Doug Wick, Roger Bartle, Ronnie Bartle, Jack Desjardins, Joe Reiser, all them guys, and we'd get together, and we played a lot of basketball at our farm or somebody else's place, and we'd always pretend it was the Philadelphia 76ers against the Boston Celtics, because those were the big teams. I'll tell you, I was Casey Jones, Sam Jones, Wilt Chamberlain, Phil Russell. But that's how we'd play. We'd throw the ball around, and Sam Jones threw it to Casey. Casey's got the layup. Wilt blocked it, and this one, you know, and like a lot. Like I say, fortunately, we didn't have social media to destroy our lives and desocialize us.
right.
All your dreams.
And of course, like I said, we had to figure out stuff ourselves. If you wanted to do something, you had to figure it out. If you wanted to go somewhere or do something, build something, or whatever you might do, you had to really figure it out yourself. If you wanted to drive to Nescorio, you didn't have to put the what do they call it? The GPS on. You actually had to look at a map.
Yeah, read a map.
Yeah, it was novel, and of course, back then everybody was respect for people.
Yeah, you're right.
Was a big thing in every school in town. The kids were, I mean, they were respectful. You learned respect. Took me till I was 20 years old to figure out that I thought there was only 2 first names in the world, Mr. So-and-so and Mrs. So-and-so, before I knew you could call them by a real name or that they even had one. Oh, and I can also remember at home growing up on D, where we had the phone, the crank phone, you know, you had the party lines and the operator, and honestly, under that one counter, and that. And then you'd have to, you know, call. So if anybody wants to call me, my number's Axtel 53444.
That was your number?
Yep. Yep. So again, that's the way it was. We polished our shoes every Saturday night to go to church on Sunday.
And dressed up for church.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, remember those things they'd stick in your pants legs to put a grease in them, and then you'd hang them up overnight. And for entertainment, we were lucky. We watched Ponderosa, Gunsmoke, Matt Dillon, and Ed Sullivan. And I remember the night the Beatles appeared first on Ed Sullivan. I remember late in my folks' room where, you know, Ed Sullivan was one of the few shows you got to watch, and there they were. And we had a huge garden out there too, which I think everybody did. And canning, people canned. You know, again, now it's Walmart, you know, 3 for 69 cents, but back then people canned, we canned beets, and you name it, and I think maybe it caused some psychological issues in my life, because we had 2 rows of green beans, 2 rows of yellow beans long. They grew every other day. You had to pick beans every damn day. And I haven't grown one since, and I never will. Go pick the beans. And we lived on a farm that had 50 oak trees, which I swear to God they wouldn't cut them down because it made my brother something to do. And it taught us something, right? I always said, you know, how to do things versus maybe didn't have to look it up on the internet. If the wind was blowing behind you, and you were raking this way, you soon figured out, turn around this way, and let the wind blow the leaves that way. And tomorrow we just do it again, because you know how oak trees are, they give up their leaves late and give them up every day, and it was relentless down in the beans. Okay, I'm done.
Wow, that was
Sure.
Does anybody want to ask Cliff a question about anything that he said or refute any of the facts that he presented?
Except don't ask me if I always talk this much. Because the answer might be yes.
Where'd you go swimming?
Pardon me?
Where'd you go swimming?
Where did you swim in? Folks used to take us out to the inlet by Green Lake. I remember going there, but honestly, that was about it.
The swimming hole, did you ever, that was on the corner by, on Farmers Street?
No,
That's where we all went.
I was too busy picking beans, Rich. I didn't have time to go swimming, sorry. I guess.
Did you raise cucumbers too?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Well, you know, again, right? Back then, you raised everything. Corn,
Yeah.
beans, potatoes, carrots, onions, cucumbers, beets. Put them through the strainer.
Everything we grow up here.
Well, Cliff, I thoroughly enjoyed meeting you for the first time.
Well,
And
likewise.
hearing all this, I mean, it was impossible for me to drag a story on you, but I got it done, so. I really appreciate your time.
Well, thanks.
Let's give him another round of
Thank you for
applause.
having me.
I have one thing to say when you talk about Doc Miller.
Yeah.
I can remember in high school, if you had a sore throat, you went up there and you'd iodine it. And this was back in the 60s.
Sure.
And you'd say, Doc, what do I owe you? You go, what kind of cigarettes do you smoke?
Wasn't a bad thing back then. Hey, two other comments if I may. Thank you for having me, I really appreciate it. And you folks that have had everything to do with this place is really top notch. It really, really is. I like old stuff, you know, a lot of people do, a lot of people don't. I happen to, and over the years, museums and stuff, we've gone to quite a few of
Yeah.
them, and you know, you think you're gonna stop for 2 hours and you spend the whole day at these places. This is very, very well done and a real asset to the community, and you guys should be very proud of it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.